Hi, and welcome to In the Cosm. I'm your host, Canadian speculative fiction author Kat Gordon. I've started this podcast so I can chat with authors and other creatives I simply fangirl over. I hope you enjoy diving into my microcosm and feel inspired to seek out the works of these amazing humans. Hi, I'm Kat Gordon, and today is such a big deal for me because I have with me the wonderfully talented Su J Sokol. Sue is a social rights activist and a writer of speculative, liminal, and interstitial fiction. Originally from Brooklyn, Sue now makes Montreal's her home. Her short fiction has appeared or is upcoming in The Future Fire, Spark, a creative anthology, TFFX 10th Anniversary Anthology, Glittership, an LGBTQ science fiction and fantasy podcast, Glittership, Year One Anthology, After the Orange, Ruin and Recovery, and Amazing Stories. Sue's debut novel, Cycling to Asylum, was longlisted for the Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic and has been optioned for a feature-length film. Their second novel, Run Jay Run, was published by Renaissance Press, and Sue's third novel, entitled Z, has just been released in both French and English by Mouton Noir Acadie. Welcome, Sue!
Thank you, Kat. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is so exciting.
It is so exciting. It's so exciting for me. I was just, as I was putting this together, I was remembering when I first saw you. I was with Talia at CanCon 2016, and you were on a writing critique panel. And everything you said, we were like, that person's cool. That person's cool. We like that person. And it's just amazing how you could just see someone and have stars in your eyes. And then just through the magic of the publishing world, you become colleagues and friends. And I'm just so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Had I known you were thinking those thoughts, we could have become friends even sooner.
I better get my thoughts out there because, I am rather a shy and demure type of person. So here's the thing. You're working on Z. No, you've just released Z. And that's your new novel. And I'd like to know more about it because I haven't yet explored it, but I'm excited to. Could you please share with us about Z?
Sure. So Z is a story about a kid who could read the thoughts and feel the emotions of other people. And that sounds pretty cool and like something that would come in handy. But in fact, it's also something that's not so great at times. And so the book is largely about the challenges of being such a person, because especially for a child growing up who's trying to find their own path, it's really hard to be burdened with everyone else's expectations and thoughts and ideas, and it makes it very confusing when you're trying to figure out who you are, because you want to please everyone and you're confused. And so this is a big challenge for Z. So it's about kind of like the power and limits of empathy. And at the same time, it's a story about Z's family, the four adults who make up her family or who come to understand that they're a family, because it takes a bunch of events before that happens too. So it's also about the four adults in Z's life. This is actually, it's being marketed as a young adult novel,
Okay.
although I didn't originally write it that way. But and I'm curious to know what people think about that. I know that adults have read it and liked it, and I know some kids too. But it's interesting to me because I don't really I think of it as both adults and young adults, but it's cool to be able to be, also writing for young adults as well.
So the idea of hyper empathy really appeals to me as an autistic person. There a lot of times we're under the actual real life trope of not having empathy, but many of us are hyper empathetic. I wanted to know what inspired you to choose that theme for your protagonist.
I guess there are two things. One has to do with my daughter. So when my daughter was small, I really did believe that she could read minds. I really believed it, and I thought, well, that would be interesting for a story. But personally, I have a little bit of an issue like Z has. I mean, I don't really read minds. I don't think, but I feel myself to be hyper aware of what other people are thinking And it makes me, it causes me some pain, actually. It's hard to deal with sometimes. I'm always thinking, oh, that person, they were just upset by what I said. What do I do? And
Right.
it gets me tied in knots. And I might be wrong about these things. Sometimes I'm right, but I just don't realize that it doesn't matter as much as I think it does. So I wanted to explore that a little bit, both as someone who experiences something like that, I think sometimes, and
Yeah.
just, how science fiction just takes a thing and just runs away in crazy directions with it, in unusual directions. So that's what I was trying to do.
Well, I mean, I just, now I'm like 3,000 times more curious to read it. Because yeah, it's true. Like, particularly if you're a compassionate person, right? Kind of outward thinking, you can be sensitive to what other people think. And to take that to the level that you're taking it to in this book, and it to be a young person, the person is young as well. Um, with all the things that growing up means, I could really see how that would be a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, most kids just want to please the adults and their peers. Like, that's especially once you hit adolescence, it's all about that.
Mhm.
And it's just could be excruciating. Um and so yeah, I just wanted to explore that a bit. Yeah.
And it's in English and in French. That's kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. The publisher is a francophone, French language publisher, Acadian publisher in New Brunswick. It's a long story how it found its way there, but they were looking for kind of edgy, young adult writing, and then they really liked it, but they're like, well, we need it to be in French. So they hired a translator and they translated it, and that in itself was a really, really interesting experience, because I do speak French. I mean, not perfect. I didn't really come to learn French well or at all. Kind of, I knew a little bit of French growing up, but not until I immigrated. And then I went to the Francisation classes and tried to learn French. And so it was interesting for me to read my words in French and see how you would do, how you do the same thing. Sometimes you have to really come about it from a different angle in French than you would in English.
Right,
And
with the idioms and stuff like that, right? And
yeah,
expressions, yeah.
language is different, cultural reference points are different. There's a whole thing we had to figure out good, non-binary
Mm.
pronouns in French, and it's much more challenging in French because there are so many opportunities to genderize language in French that you don't have in English. All that was super interesting. It was great working with this talented translator, and seeing what we could make out of it. Even the title Z is challenging for Canadians because I'm from New York, as you said, and Z is the last letter of the alphabet when you're an American, but it isn't here. It's Z. So you've kind of, yeah, it's interesting. But
I'm
anyway,
so glad you said that, because I almost made the joke saying that your book is Z in the US and Z in Canada. So yeah, it's true. I don't even know how, I should know why it's Z, but I actually just don't. So whatever.
why is it Z? I mean, I don't know either. I think it's related to French. I mean, European, French and English influenced each other a lot in Europe, but then the U.S. did a bunch of things differently. Some of the language differences between Canadian English and U.S. English have to do with it being more influenced by England and also by French.
Mm-hmm. So you now, when was the official release of Z? When was that? That was 2020?
Yeah, I guess it was no, I don't know, November or December. That's the very end of the year,
Right.
basically.
So what's it like to release a novel during a global pandemic? I mean, we're so used to going to, readings and cons and different things. Like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I was really worried about that. I have to be honest. My
Mm.
first two books, my launches were such special moments. Surrounded by friends and family and supporters, and I didn't know how was I going to do a launch. I'd done readings on Zoom, and it's just like, to me, it was like talking into a void. It was
Right.
really, really hard. I tried things like, well, what if we do gallery, and I could look at everyone's faces, but there's so little. Really see their expressions, and I was upset. I didn't know what I was going to do about it. So I kept on thinking about how we drink wine and eat snacks at the launch. And so I came up with an idea. I'm very fortunate because I live in a house with a porch, a covered porch, which is not that usual in Montreal.
Right.
Um, and I had this idea that I could make mulled wine. It was going to be like cold out, of course, we're in Montreal, and vegan chocolate chip muffins. And what I would do is I would invite people who felt comfortable to come to my porch. I would give them a glass of mulled wine and a muffin, and I would sign a book for them. And I would have people come one by one, and we'd wear masks, and we'd be outside, and it would be COVID safe. And and then I could sort of replicate a little bit, at least that human, face-to-face thing, and it worked out pretty well. Some people arrived at the same time as other people, and I would just wait in the garden, or whatever.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah,
That's pretty creative way to handle it, really.
it was, yeah, it was great. It was really nice, and I actually finally had some mulled wine myself that night. I did. That was the day of the English launch. I did the French launch on a Thursday, and then I did the English launch on a Sunday. So all day Sunday, I had people coming. But I was also thinking about my friends who couldn't or wouldn't or didn't feel like comfortable to come, and I knew they wanted the book and wanted a signed book, and I wanted them to have it. So I came up with this other idea, which was that I took a list of people in that situation, and my partner and I biked all over Montreal Saturday
Oh,
night delivering books. And some people were in actual quarantine, so we did these contactless deliveries of the book, and people
right.
sent e-payments. And so, it made it feel. I've always had bicycles part of my lunches ever since cycling to Asylum.
Very cool.
I was really happy to be able to have bicycling involved. And then the launch itself was very creative. So my publisher, they were great. They found this this kind of a queer Acadian drag queen comedian to animate the event, and they were so sparkly, and I was just baffled. And we had readings, and we had Q&As, and we had audience participation and book giveaways. And so it just made the event much more warm. And there was an advantage. I had two launches, one in French, one in English, but there was an advantage to having the Zoom launch, because usually I have a launch in Montreal and a launch in New York, and then
Right.
hopefully also one in Toronto and Ottawa. But I could have everybody at the same launch this way. Geography wasn't a factor. And I actually had people from France and
Oh,
Germany who had to stay up really late, but I had a few of them, and it just was like, wow, I couldn't have done that in
yeah.
a
Yeah,
launch.
the reach is fantastic when you also have virtual. It's making like I mean, I'm an extrovert. I love being with people. But I'm half thinking that even when we come at the other end of this pandemic, virtual and in-person launches are not a bad thing, because with the virtual you can reach a wider audience. Like you say, if some people feel like staying up or whatnot, or you schedule it a certain way, you could have people from Europe and other places as well.
Yeah. And actually, the first time I ever seen anything like that was with you when we had at Glad Day, and you
Right.
came virtually, and I was like, wow, this is great. you know?
That was fantastic. And Glad Day Bookshop is always going to have a warm place in my heart because of that accessibility that they offered me. But I do know what you mean, though, because I had never done anything like that before. And it was before I even knew what really Zoom was much about. I had done a few things with Talia, but never like this.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even hear people laugh. And I'm trying to read
Yeah.
things that are funny, and I'm going, please let them laugh. I hope they're laughing. But I think, if we decide this as a whole in the publishing industry, we can continue the virtual component as well. I think it would be really good for a lot of people.
Mhm. It's true, but we will have to find a solution to that problem, because this really is a problem when you try to read and you're not getting the laughs and you're not getting the reaction. I saw a comedian, like a comedy show, where like none of the laugh track, nothing's there, and it just feels, all the jokes feel like they're falling dead. So then I saw this other act where the person had their partner in the room and was
Mhm.
joking with their partner the whole time, and that made all the difference. Just to have one person in the room laughing was,
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah. Um, that's something I think, I feel like as a person who likes accessibility and accommodation, I got to figure that out. I'm going to make that my mission. I'll let you know if I learn anything, and let me know if you learn anything as well. Okay, that's amazing. Those are great ideas, and I'm going to listen to this again to make sure that I write them down. I want to go talk a little bit about some of your other works. The last book that I read from you was Run Jay Run, and I even wrote in my notes that I could have done a whole hour podcast on Run Jay Run. It to me, it's exquisitely written. It explores mental illness and trauma and PTSD in a way that I feel is non-harmful in terms of tropes. I also love that the support system is a polyamorous relationship. And I just wanted to know, was it important to you to write that story, defying those kinds of harmful tropes and representing mental illness in a way that people who have mental illness can relate to, and also showing, polyamory without all those tropes and cliches? Were those two themes important to you to demonstrate in your work?
Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely they're important, but the way I come to decide to write a story is a character makes themselves known to me, and they say, hello, and then I want to learn more about them, and they tell me things, and I do research and things, and they tell me things that happen to them, and then I start learning about the people in their life, and that's how I came to write this story. But then once writing it, um, like when I realized I had to deal with these issues, because the person who came to me happened to have a serious mental illness and happened to be in a polyamorous relationship, I knew I would have to write about those things in a way that was, that was good, that wasn't tropes and that wasn't misinformation, and that was sensitive. So like that was very important to me once the story made itself aware to me. But I
Right.
set out like, oh, I'm going to write a polyamorous love story with a person who has mental. It wasn't like that. It was just,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it was very important. I mean, in writing about, for instance, so the character Zach, who's the person in the story with the biggest mental health problem, but who's arguably the main character, although not the narrator, who's
Mm.
Jay. You could go back and forth on who's the real main character of that story, but the first thing I wanted to just be really clear about is this sort of idea that someone's mental illness defines them,
Mhm.
like they are their mental illness, and so I thought it was really important to try to show that Zach is a person who's extremely interesting and complex and attractive and flawed, and some of these things have to do with his mental illness and some of these things don't. I mean, he's just
Right.
like he would do these things that were very unusual. Like he's a very unusual person and does unusual things, and some of the unusual things he does, I mean, they don't have anything to do with his mental health. He's just an unusual person,
Mhm.
and that's just how it is. And there's a moment in this story where Jay is talking to his psychiatrist and is like, if there were this pill that Zach could take that would make him like everybody else, that would make him quote unquote normal, I wouldn't even want him to take it. Not that he would take it,
Right,
but
right.
I just want him not to be suffering. I just want him not to be in pain. Like
Mhm.
that's what I want. Not that he changed to somebody else. So that was an important thing for me to write about mental illness in that way. Um, and and I also there's this, also Zach is from a marginalized community. So, and there are a lot of bad things that have happened to him. But
Mhm.
I didn't want this toxic trope of someone who's marginalized, whose story ends in tragedy. It
Yes.
could easily have ended in tragedy. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I wouldn't write a story like that. I couldn't break my own heart or
Yeah.
anyone's hearts. Um,
Exactly.
and so at the same time, though, you have to avoid the trope of, and then we figured out what was the big trauma, and then they were okay forever and everything was fine. And no, 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 no. It doesn't work that way, and I made it very clear, even in trying to offer like a happily ever after-ish story, that doesn't mean that Zach is cured, that
Yes.
or anything like that, just that, yeah. So those were the things that I was really trying to avoid, in writing about mental illness. Um, with the polyamory, I mean, I guess the biggest misconception when people think about polyamory that I'm familiar with is this idea of a dude with all these wives, like
Right.
all these girlfriends. So I definitely wasn't, so I created I write about a certain type of polyamory in this story, and
Hmm.
there's so many types, but this
Right.
is like a stable triad. That's
Hmm.
MMF, male, male, female. And so that's going to avoid the dude with a lot of wives problem.
That will
Um,
do it right there.
yeah. But I also wanted it to be really clear that for the female character, Annie, that this isn't something she's been forced into,
Hmm.
against her will, that she's just going along with, but that it was something that, in fact, she's really pretty much behind it. But aside from that, how much emotional benefit she gets out of this, and she's the one who explains it to my main character, who's a bit, hesitant, because the other thing about polyamory is a lot of people think of it as just promiscuity, or
Yes.
doesn't want to commit, which
Hmm.
is so the opposite of the story that I wrote. And But it's hard for Jay because he's an extremely loyal person, and he doesn't necessarily, he has ways of thinking sometimes that he needs
Hmm.
to kind of break out of, and he had to learn that being in this relationship doesn't mean that you're not loyal or that you're not committing, and and it could be healthy and ethical and the best kind of, in fact, at some point in the story he says something like every child should have at least three parents.
Right, exactly. I mean, I loved the way it was done. There's so much about that book that I love. But all the things that you said that you were working hard to make sure you didn't misrepresent, in my opinion, you get like, when the teacher used to put a big smiley face on your paper, like you did it so well. And I like the thing that you said about you wanted to avoid this taking a pill, and you say that Jay says, that he wouldn't even want Zach to take a pill that would make him like everybody else. Again, that resonates with me. I'm someone who manages mental illness, but I'm also autistic. And my autism is what you see, like my humor, my quirkiness, all the little things that make up Cat. That's my autism. It's how my brain is configured.
It's your
Um,
awesomeness.
oh, my awesome autumnness. And but I deal with depression, and I don't like it. So that's depression is something that I try to I have help for. I go to therapy, and if it gets in my way and prevents me from thriving, well, we have to deal with that. But so I kind of like that kind of duality of, there's a personality and their own personal neurodivergence, and then there's mental illness. So you want to always help people with the stuff that's harming them, and if
Right.
something's not harming them and that's just them being them, you just let them be.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Yeah. And I could have easily also created like his psychiatrist as being someone who's like a bad psychiatrist and
Right.
but she wasn't. She was highly intelligent and empathic and competent, and yet she made mistakes.
Hmm.
And but what was critical is her willingness to listen to her patient and to his loved ones, and to change her idea about, okay, maybe this other thing is going on, and think outside the box. And that's what made her so great as a psychiatrist.
Oh no, it's the book is so good. I just yeah, I think I'm going to read it again. But the first book that I did buy from you was Cycling to Asylum. And I remember I said something to you, and you said, so many people said to you, like, "Are you a prophet?" The way that you wrote Cycling to Asylum, and you wrote it before kind of the way things are today. That you must have thought that was funny. That you were talking about, you're writing a character now who reads minds and such. um, Half of us were wondering if you could predict the future. Would you like to talk about Cycling to Asylum for a little bit?
Sure. I mean, so Cycling to Asylum, for people who don't know, the story is about a couple of activists living in a near future kind of dystopian United States, who find that they need to flee, that their lives are in danger, and take their kids. But the way they flee is kind of unusual, because they bike across the border posing as tourists, and then they make a claim for refugee status in Montreal in Quebec.
Mhm.
Um, and and so yeah, there's people have said a lot of things about the book, predicting things, like, for instance, there's a lot in the book that has to do with police violence, and it came out right before Ferguson.
Right.
Yeah, but it was, but it was something that was, continuously comes to different boiling points, Black Lives Matter, different
Mm,
waves of that. And it's unfortunately a problem we haven't solved yet.
yeah.
And it's something that like I've thought about a lot, in my activism. And so it was something I was going to put into the story, because it existed. And, I think it's no secret to people who read and write speculative fiction that many authors are actually writing about the present when they seem to be writing about the future, and that's what I was doing.
Mm,
A lot of the things I knew I couldn't get away. There were a lot of very dystopian things about the United States that actually like existed and still exist, and I didn't think I could write a story that was just contemporary fiction where activists come to Canada and try to get refugee status, because no one would believe it. Because
right.
people think, oh, but it's a democracy, everything's great, But I live there and I know better, and so I said, well, I'll just make it science fiction to avoid the argument. But so like people, but it's true that people like just a couple of years after my book. So I came up with the idea in 2008, but I wasn't able to find space in my life to write it until 2011, 2012, and then it was published in 2014. But then, soon after that, people were sneaking across the border into Canada by
Mm,
foot.
yeah.
Um, and but it's not the first time people have snuck into Canada, from the United States. There's a long history of that and different events happening. But yeah, but the only thing I always tell people I take credit for is like maybe a year or less than a year after Cycling was published, Montreal declared itself a sanctuary city, which is something I had in the book,
Right.
declaring itself a sanctuary city. So I'm like, okay, I'll take that. But sadly, the truth is that Montreal is not a sanctuary city.
Mm,
And we have a way long way to go to become one. And so I just hope we'll point seeds, to work more on that issue. But yeah, so that's cycling, and I'm actually, I hope I could say this, but I'm working on a sequel to
oh,
cycling. Um,
yay.
that takes place 3 years after cycling ends. And I mean, you mentioned I'm from New York, so our decision to come here was politically motivated. So
Mm,
it is related. We weren't um, asylum seekers, but now I'm writing this sequel with the eyes of someone who's lived here for a while now and is a little bit more clear-eyed.
mm,
And so again, I'm writing about contemporary problems both in our country and in the United States and abroad, and about the people who were trying to fight those problems and make the world a more just place. But I'm just futurizing it and using cool technologies and made up countries and that kind of thing.
that's very cool. Would I mean, I can't believe it. I say this every podcast. I can't believe we're starting to run out of time because I get so involved and I just want to hear everybody talk all day long. Um, but just thinking about cycling to asylum and such, you describe yourself as a social activist. Can you just quickly tell us, like, do you feel like your writing is also part of that, and do you do other things related to social activism?
Yes, I mean, yes to both.
Mm,
So in New York, I was a legal services lawyer, a lawyer for tenants and tenant organizations and housing organizations, and fighting for decent, affordable housing for people
mm,
as a basic right. And
yeah.
I do similar work here in Montreal. I work for a community organization, and we also write for work for the right to people to have a decent income, access to health care, so on and so forth. We work with a lot of immigrants and refugees, but we work with everybody. And so I feel like the work that I do is advocacy and activism.
Yeah.
And then I'm also just an activist in my life, involved in a lot of different causes and against a lot of isms and phobias.
Right,
and
right.
and I do see my writing as a form of activism too, because I'm trying to write about the things that I see and my ideas of what would be a better world and what we need to get rid of, and I try to present it in that context. And in fact, when cycling came out, a lot of the events I had, I tried to combine with some sort of social justice issue, like rights of immigrants or cycling environmentalism and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Well, it's amazing. Just keep writing, keep doing everything that you do. It's time for my final question because this is my favorite one because I get to learn new things about people. What is a fun fact about yourself?
A fun fact about myself. Okay. Um, I don't know if it's fun or not, but let me say this. So people who are familiar with my work probably get that I like sports.
Hmm.
I enjoy cycling and know a lot about baseball and basketball and played both things. But I guess people maybe don't realize that I'm also into music. So a
Oh,
fun fact about me is that as a kid, I played piano, cello, and string bass.
that's
And I also sang
awesome.
in many choirs. And in fact, I was in a children's choir that performed at Carnegie Hall. I have no idea if Canadians know what Carnegie Hall is. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
How
We
do you get to
do.
Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Okay. Anyway, so yes, maybe that's a fun fact because it's less obvious from my persona and my writing that that is a big thing in my life too, or has been for since I was little.
Well, that's fantastic. You know what? I play electric bass guitar, so you can get your string bass. I'll play electric bass and we'll do some kind of spinal tap with like too much bass in it.
Ooh, that sounds like fun.
That's great.
Do that.
I have to say goodbye to you and I don't want
Yes.
to, but I do. Thank
Wow.
you so
Me
much
too.
for coming on my little podcast. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This was so much fun.
Folks, you can learn more about Su J Sokol's books and how to connect with Sue by visiting their website, sujsokol.com. That's SUJSOKOL.com. Transcripts for In the Cosm are available at catgordon.com. That's CAIT Gordon.com. Thanks for joining us. Take care and stay safe.